Welcome to Fear Files, where the shadows come to life and the mysteries of the unknown await. Join us as we explore the mysteries lurking within these walls, where every creak and whisper tells a tale of the supernatural.
In the quiet, secluded town of Ravensbrook, nestled against the brooding Blackwood forest, stood the Blackwood Mortuary. The late 19th century had cast its somber pall over the town, and the mortuary was a fitting monument to the era's macabre sensibilities. The building itself, with its Gothic arches and towering spires, seemed to loom over the surrounding landscape, a sentinel of death. Jonathan Graves, the funeral director of Blackwood Mortuary, moved through the dimly lit halls with a practiced precision. At 42, he was a man marked by loss and duty. His wife's untimely death had carved deep lines of sorrow into his face, and the mortuary had become both his refuge and his prison. He found solace in the meticulous care he afforded to the dead, ensuring their final journey was dignified and serene. But serenity was a distant memory in Blackwood Mortuary. Lately, Jonathan had been tormented by strange noises echoing through the empty halls and fleeting shadows that danced at the edge of his vision. The most disturbing occurrences, however, were the nightly disappearances of bodies from their caskets. Each morning, Jonathan would find the heavy oak lids ajar, the satin linings empty, and the corpses gone without a trace. One night, driven by a mix of fear and determination, Jonathan decided to uncover the truth. He positioned himself in the mortuary's main parlor, a room filled with ornate caskets and the oppressive scent of embalming fluid. As midnight approached, the air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness settled over the mortuary. The silence was shattered by a soft rustling. Jonathan's heart pounded as he crept toward the source of the sound. He peered into the shadows and saw a figure moving among the caskets. It was one of the corpses, its eyes open and lifeless, yet it moved with a dreadful purpose. "Who are you?" Jonathan whispered, his voice trembling. The corpse turned to face him, and Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. The eyes were vacant, but the mouth moved, forming words in a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the grave. "Samuel Blackwood." Jonathan staggered back, the name striking fear into his heart. Samuel Blackwood had been the mortuary's original owner, a man whose dark practices and rumored dealings with the occult had made him a figure of terror in Ravensbrook. Blackwood had died under mysterious circumstances, and now his malevolent spirit seemed to have returned. Samuel's spirit, using the reanimated corpses, was seeking vengeance. He wanted to reclaim the mortuary and continue his quest for eternal life. The corpses, driven by his will, were his instruments of terror. Jonathan knew he had to stop Samuel, but the odds were against him. He was alone, facing an enemy who had already conquered death. The stakes were high. Not only his life, but the very soul of Ravensbrook hung in the balance. In his quest, Jonathan sought help from the townsfolk, uncovering long-buried secrets and forging uneasy alliances. Each interaction revealed more about Samuel's dark past and his plans. The town's residents, fearful and suspicious, spoke in hushed tones about the strange occurrences and the ominous presence that seemed to hang over the mortuary. "Mr. Graves, you must understand," said Old Man Harris, the town historian. "Samuel Blackwood's thirst for power was insatiable. He dabbled in forbidden rites, seeking to cheat death itself. His spirit will not rest until he achieves his goal." Jonathan's determination grew stronger. He couldn't let Samuel's evil legacy continue. He armed himself with knowledge and courage, ready to face the undead horrors and the malevolent spirit. As he confronted the reanimated corpses, Jonathan realized that each one was a pawn in Samuel's game. Their tortured souls were bound to the mortuary, forced to obey Samuel's commands. Jonathan's heart ached for them, and he vowed to free them from their torment. The final confrontation took place in the heart of the mortuary, where Samuel's spirit manifested in a swirling vortex of darkness. The air was thick with malice, and Jonathan felt the weight of countless souls pressing down on him. "Samuel Blackwood," Jonathan shouted, "your time is over. Release these souls and return to the darkness from whence you came." Samuel's spirit laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the mortuary. "You think you can stop me, Jonathan Graves? I have transcended death. I am eternal." But Jonathan had uncovered a ritual, an ancient rite that could banish Samuel's spirit and free the trapped souls. With trembling hands, he began the incantation, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his heart. As the final words left his lips, a blinding light filled the room. Samuel's spirit screamed in rage and agony, the darkness dissipating as the light grew stronger. The reanimated corpses collapsed, their souls finally freed from Samuel's grasp. The mortuary fell silent once more. Jonathan, exhausted but victorious, stood amidst the fallen bodies. He had confronted the horrors of the past and emerged triumphant. The spirits were at peace, and the oppressive presence that had haunted Blackwood Mortuary was gone. In the days that followed, Ravensbrook began to heal. The townsfolk spoke of Jonathan Graves with reverence, grateful for his bravery. Jonathan himself found a measure of peace, his grief tempered by the knowledge that he had restored dignity to the dead and protected the living from a malevolent force. The Blackwood Mortuary remained a somber monument, but it was no longer a place of fear. It stood as a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of redemption. And Jonathan Graves, the funeral director who had faced death and emerged victorious, continued his work with renewed purpose, honoring the dead and ensuring that their final journey was one of peace and dignity. In the secluded town of Hollow Falls, nestled among mist-covered hills and ancient forests, stood the Hollow Falls Mortuary. The early 1990s cast a somber light on the small community, where traditions ran deep and secrets lay buried beneath the surface. The funeral home, a sprawling Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town, was a beacon of dignity and respect for the departed. Yet, within its walls, an unsettling presence had begun to stir. Eleanor "Ellie" Morrison moved through the dimly lit corridors of the mortuary with a heavy heart. At 38, she had inherited the family business after her father's untimely death, a burden that weighed heavily on her shoulders. The funeral home had been her sanctuary and her prison, a place where she sought solace in caring for the dead while grappling with her own grief. The mortuary was struggling financially, and Ellie knew that one more setback could spell the end of her family's legacy. She was determined to keep the business afloat, not just for her sake, but for the memory of her father and the community that depended on her. But recently, mourners had begun to report strange sightings. They spoke of deceased loved ones walking aimlessly through the halls after hours, their hollow eyes filled with an eerie purpose. At first, Ellie dismissed the accounts as figments of grief-stricken imaginations. But as the reports grew more frequent and detailed, she could no longer ignore the unsettling truth. One late evening, as the mortuary's antique chandeliers cast flickering shadows across the walls, Ellie decided to investigate. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and lilies, and an oppressive silence hung over the mansion. Armed with a lantern and a heart filled with determination, she ventured into the depths of the mortuary. As she walked through the labyrinthine corridors, Ellie heard a soft rustling sound. Her heart pounded in her chest as she followed the noise, her lantern casting long shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. She turned a corner and gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Before her stood a figure, its eyes hollow and lifeless, yet filled with a cryptic purpose. It was one of the deceased, a man she had prepared for burial just days before. He moved with a slow, deliberate gait, his expression vacant, yet somehow determined. "Who are you?" Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. The figure turned to face her, its mouth moving to form words that seemed to come from beyond the grave. Daniel Blackwood. Ellie's blood ran cold. Daniel Blackwood had been the town's mayor, a charismatic and manipulative leader with a hidden obsession with the occult. His death had been shrouded in mystery, and now his malevolent spirit seemed to have returned. As Ellie delved deeper into the mystery, she uncovered the dark truth behind Daniel's death. He had been involved in forbidden rituals, seeking power and control over the town through nefarious means. His unfinished ritual required the souls of the deceased, and his spirit now sought to complete it. Ellie knew she had to stop him. The stakes were high. Not only was the mortuary's future in jeopardy, but the very souls of Hollow Falls were at risk. She couldn't let Daniel's evil legacy continue. Seeking help from the townsfolk, Ellie uncovered long-buried secrets and forged uneasy alliances. Each interaction revealed more about Daniel's dark past and his plans. The town's residents, fearful and suspicious, spoke in hushed tones about the strange occurrences and the ominous presence that seemed to hang over the mortuary. "Ellie, you must understand," said Reverend Thompson, the town's spiritual leader. "Daniel Blackwood's thirst for power was insatiable. He dabbled in forbidden rites, seeking to cheat death itself. His spirit will not rest until he achieves his goal." Ellie's determination grew stronger. She couldn't let Daniel's malevolent plan succeed. She armed herself with knowledge and courage, ready to face the undead horrors and the malevolent spirit. As she confronted the reanimated corpses, Ellie realized that each one was a pawn in Daniel's game. Their tortured souls were bound to the mortuary, forced to obey Daniel's commands. Ellie's heart ached for them, and she vowed to free them from their torment. The final confrontation took place in the heart of the mortuary, where Daniel's spirit manifested in a swirling vortex of darkness. The air was thick with malice, and Ellie felt the weight of countless souls pressing down on her. "Daniel Blackwood!" Ellie shouted. "Your time is over! Release these souls and return to the darkness from whence you came!" Daniel's spirit laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the mortuary. "You think you can stop me, Eleanor Morrison? I have transcended death. I am eternal." But Ellie had uncovered a ritual, an ancient rite that could banish Daniel's spirit and free the trapped souls. With trembling hands, she began the incantation, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her heart. As the final words left her lips, a blinding light filled the room. Daniel's spirit screamed in rage and agony, the darkness dissipating as the light grew stronger. The reanimated corpses collapsed, their souls finally freed from Daniel's grasp. The mortuary fell silent once more. Ellie, exhausted but victorious, stood amidst the fallen bodies. She had confronted the horrors of the past and emerged triumphant. The spirits were at peace, and the oppressive presence that had haunted Hollow Falls mortuary was gone. In the days that followed, Hollow Falls began to heal. The townsfolk spoke of Ellie Morrison with reverence, grateful for her bravery. Ellie herself found a measure of peace, her grief tempered by the knowledge that she had restored dignity to the dead and protected the living from a malevolent force. The Hollow Falls mortuary remained a somber monument, but it was no longer a place of fear. It stood as a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of resilience. And Ellie Morrison, the funeral director who had faced death and emerged victorious, continued her work with renewed purpose, honoring the dead and ensuring that their final journey was one of peace and dignity. In the late 1920s, the small, fog-shrouded town of Cold Hollow lay nestled in the rural countryside of New England. Its quiet streets and old buildings seemed frozen in time, but none were as foreboding as Grimwood Mortuary. The sprawling Gothic manor on the town's edge had long been a place of solemn respect and whispered fear. Surrounded by an overgrown cemetery, its interior was a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors, antique furniture, and dusty velvet drapes. The walls, adorned with portraits of solemn-faced ancestors, seemed to watch over the mortuary with a silent, eerie vigilance. Thomas Gray, a meticulous and somber man of 32, recently arrived in Cold Hollow to take up the role of undertaker, inheriting the position from his estranged uncle. He had a deep respect for the dead and a strong sense of duty, determined to bring dignity and professionalism to Grimwood Mortuary. Beneath his calm demeanor lay a troubled past and a relentless curiosity. As he settled into his new role, he began to notice subtle, unsettling changes in the atmosphere. Shadows seemed to move independently of their sources. Cold drafts whispered of forgotten secrets, and the deceased appeared to subtly shift position when no one was looking. At first, Thomas dismissed these occurrences as tricks of the mind, a product of his own tiredness and the gloomy setting. But as the days turned into weeks, the strange phenomena became impossible to ignore. One late evening, as the mortuary's antique chandeliers cast flickering shadows across the walls, Thomas stood alone in the preparation room. The air was thick with the scent of must and decay. He carefully arranged the body of an elderly woman, her face serene in death. As he turned to gather his tools, he felt a chill creep down his spine. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he sensed that he was not alone. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing through the empty room. Silence answered him, but the feeling of being watched remained. He turned back to the body and froze. The woman's eyes, which had been closed, were now open, staring blankly at the ceiling. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped closer, trying to rationalize what he was seeing. He reached out a trembling hand to close her eyes once more, but the air around him grew colder, and a faint whisper echoed through the room. "Help us!" Thomas recoiled, his mind racing. He had heard stories of Grimwood Mortuary's dark history, of unexplained deaths and restless spirits, but he had never believed them. Now, faced with undeniable evidence, he knew he had to uncover the truth. As night descended, Thomas delved into the mortuary's past, poring over old records and journals left behind by his uncle. The deeper he dug, the more he realized that Grimwood Mortuary was a place of dark secrets. He discovered that Reverend Silas Blackwood, a former clergyman and occultist, had once performed a ritual within the mortuary's walls, binding the souls of the departed to the mortal realm. Silas's obsession with the occult had led to his downfall, but his malevolent spirit remained, trapped and driven by a desire for eternal life and power. Thomas knew he had to stop Silas's spirit and break the ritual before the malevolent force consumed them all. He sought help from the townsfolk, uncovering long-buried secrets and forging uneasy alliances. Each interaction revealed more about Silas's dark past and his plans. The town's residents, fearful and suspicious, spoke in hushed tones about the strange occurrences and the ominous presence that seemed to hang over the mortuary. "Thomas, you must understand," said Mary Halloway, the town's historian. "Silas Blackwood's thirst for power was insatiable. He dabbled in forbidden rites, seeking to cheat death itself. His spirit will not rest until he achieves his goal." Thomas's determination grew stronger. He couldn't let Silas's malevolent plan succeed. He armed himself with knowledge and courage, ready to face the undead horrors and the malevolent spirit. Thomas's nights grew longer and more perilous as he immersed himself in the arcane texts his uncle had collected. He found references to rituals and protective symbols that could be used to combat malevolent spirits. One particularly harrowing night, while reading a dusty tome by candlelight, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the empty corridors of the mortuary. The hairs on his arms stood on end as he slowly rose from his desk, the candlelight casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. "Who's there?" he called out again, his voice barely above a whisper. The footsteps paused, then resumed, growing louder and more deliberate. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed a heavy iron candlestick for protection. He followed the sound through the dimly lit hallways, the candle flickering wildly in his trembling hand. The footsteps led him to the mortuary's chapel, where the air was icy cold, and the oppressive feeling of being watched was almost unbearable. As he stepped into the chapel, he saw a figure standing at the altar. It was a spectral form, translucent and glowing faintly in the darkness. Thomas recognized the figure immediately. It was Reverend Silas Blackwood. The spirit turned to face him, its hollow eyes burning with malevolent intent. "Thomas Gray," the spirit intoned, its voice echoing unnaturally. "You dare to challenge me? You cannot undo what has been done. The souls here are mine, bound by my will." Thomas steeled himself, clutching the candlestick tightly. "I will not let you torment these souls any longer, Silas. Your time is over." The spirit laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down Thomas's spine. "You are a fool, Thomas. You cannot stop me. My power is eternal." But Thomas had come prepared. He pulled a small vial of holy water from his pocket and began to recite the incantation he had memorized. As he spoke the ancient words, the spirit of Silas Blackwood writhed and shrieked, its form flickering and fading. Thomas stepped forward, splashing the holy water on the spirit, which screamed in agony. "No! This cannot be!" Silas's voice echoed through the chapel as his spirit began to dissipate. "You cannot defeat me!" With a final desperate effort, Thomas completed the incantation, and the spirit of Silas Blackwood was banished, its malevolent presence vanishing from the mortuary. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the cold air began to warm. Thomas collapsed to his knees, exhausted but triumphant. The spirits of the departed, freed from Silas's control, slowly faded into the afterlife, their hollow eyes now filled with gratitude and peace. In the days that followed, the townspeople of Cold Hollow began to notice a change in the mortuary. The once oppressive atmosphere was replaced with a sense of calm and serenity. Thomas, now a respected member of the community, continued his work with renewed purpose. He had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, ensuring that Grimwood Mortuary would be a place of rest and peace for all who passed through its doors. The tale of Thomas Gray and the haunted mortuary became a legend in Cold Hollow, a story of courage, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The dark secrets of the past were finally laid to rest, and the town could move forward, unburdened by the malevolent force that had once threatened to consume them all.
Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey with Fear Files. If you enjoyed this tale of mystery and suspense, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling stories. Your support means everything to us. Like, comment, and share your thoughts to help us bring you more terrifying content. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we uncover more secrets that will keep you on the edge of your seat.